Hey guys, my name is Elizabeth Ward. Today, Logan Norris and I are going to be giving you some tips to help you prepare for the ACT if you haven't taken it already, and raise your score if you have.
We'll start with some general tips about taking the test. First of all, do not forget your calculator. You're dead if you don't bring them. Secondly, make sure you get to bed early the night before. You've heard most of these, but they're worth repeating. Get a good night's sleep the night before. Eat breakfast the morning of, because you don't want to pass out halfway through the test. One thing that people don't always know about is plan something fun to do afterwards. Plan something with your friends, or plan a trip that you're going to take after the test, because it'll help you focus, and it'll also help lessen the dread that you'll feel, which you will feel some while you're taking the test. Also, make sure you wear a watch so you can pace yourself. Most testing rooms will have a clock there, but just in case they don't, you want to be able to time yourself to make sure you can complete the test.
Okay, so now we're going to give y'all some tips on the actual test. Logan told you a little bit about what to do before and after the test, just to ease your mind and make sure that you do everything right, so that you don't not do well because you didn't get a good night's sleep. Okay, so now you're definitely going to need some test taking tips for each of the individual subjects that encompass the ACT. So I would like to start with the English, giving some tips on the English test. There are 75 questions on the English section of the ACT. This is the longest section of all of them, and so usually if you can get through the 75 questions in the time parameter, that's the biggest thing. So like Logan was saying, make sure to wear a watch, but also as you're preparing for the ACT, make sure and take lots of practice tests within the time frame. Don't just take the test and work and say, oh, I can do all these questions, because it's great if you can do the questions, but if you can't finish them in the time allotted, then you're out of luck. So make sure to take as many practice tests on all the subject tests beforehand within the time parameters that are given when you'll actually be administered the test. Okay, most of the questions on the English test have to do with sentence structure. So for example, if you're given a question that has you reword a clause or sentence or a paragraph, you always want, if you are forced to guess, if you really don't know the answer, you always want to go with the most concise answer or the shortest answer of them all, because generally and a rule of English is to write things in the most concise way. So you don't want to use 2 or 3 sentences to say something that you could say in one sentence. So even if you are just rearranging one sentence, you want to pick the answer that uses the least words. So reading and science. Reading and science are basically the same thing. They're both reading comprehension. Basically, you have to have no prior knowledge of science to perform well on the test. So a lot of times when you're practicing for the reading and science, you might want to practice them together, because both of them are reading comprehension. Just with the science includes a lot of charts and graphs, whereas the reading portion includes strictly paragraphs. So another tip for the reading portion of the exam is there are 4 passages on the reading that you're required to read and then answer questions on. And within the 4 passages, there are 4 different subjects that remain the same. The passages are always different on every test. However, the subjects of the passages are the same. For example, there's a humanities passage, a science passage, a social science passage, and a narrative passage. And so you want, when practicing for the ACT, I think one of the best tips that I've ever been given is, and utilized, is to work reading practice tests over and over and over again. I mean, basically you're going to have to do that with every subject, but for the reading, when you're working the practice test, break down the 4 passages and say, okay, this is the arts or humanities one, this is the science one, and see which of the 4 subjects you consistently score the best on when you're taking these practice tests. So if you, out of all the passages that you complete in this practice test, if you consistently score the highest on the humanities passage, then you would, when you take the actual test, you would want to complete the humanities passage first. And it's really pretty easy usually to tell which passage is which once you've worked a lot and you become used to deciphering the different passages. So you want to pick whichever reading subject is your best and do that one first, because a lot of the test is a psychological battle. So you want to decide what you're best at and complete it first, so that you don't do one first that you're horrible at and then become bogged down or spend too much time on the first part when you're not able to go back in the, or you're not able to complete the one at the end that you might have gotten the most questions right on. So you want to pick the subject of the reading passages that you perform the best on and complete it first when you're taking the test.
Okay, so like Elizabeth said, science on the ACT is basically just reading with scientific vocabulary that tries to trip you up a lot of times. On the science section, there are 7 passages on this test. 3 of them have 5 questions, 3 of them have 6 questions, and 1 of them has 7 questions. And those 7-question passage has no graphs or tables or anything. It's just the 2 scientists' explanations of their experiments or their findings. And so what I found helpful when I've taken the science part is to do the passages with 5 questions first, because those are typically the easiest and you can get through those quickly, so you can have more time for the 6 and the 7-question passages. So I always go in order from 5 to 6 and then do the 7-question passage last, because it's usually the hardest. And this will also help you save time, because I know a lot of people don't do well in science because it's such a short time limit on the test. There are 60 questions on the math test. The first 30 questions on the math test are usually pretty easy. The next 30, number 31 through 60, they're more difficult and apply more pre-cal and algebra 2 based math on there. So if you can, you try to get through the first 30 questions of the math test within about 20 minutes. And that gives you 40 minutes to work on the harder questions 31 through 60. Now we're going to go over some general tips on how to prepare for the ACT. We've been over the mechanics of the test itself, but how do you know what to do to get ready for it? The first thing I always do is buy prep books or borrow resources from the Career Center. The Career Center has old tests that have been taken in the years past that you can use, and they're a huge asset. Also, some of the great books I've had in the past are the Real ACT Prep Book. It's a red book, then it's very popular. If you've ever taken the ACT or taken a class on it, they'll most likely recommend this book. The Princeton Review books, Barron's books, those are all great resources for you to have as well. The first thing to do prepare is to set aside about 4 hours one Saturday or whatever day you have off to take a full-length practice test. This can diagnose what areas you need to work on, and you score yourself. You place time restrictions on the test and make sure it's as close to the real thing as you can get. Then once you identify your weak areas, for example, my weak areas were math and science, you focus on those areas. And so for the next 2 or 3 weeks, however long you have up until the test, I would take one subtest every afternoon or every night. It's not much, it's 45 minutes to an hour every day, and you take the subtest that you're weak in. For example, I took a math and science subtest alternating every day for the 2 weeks leading up to the test. And occasionally I throw in an English or a reading just to make sure I stay fresh in that area. Also, don't forget when taking these subtests and practice tests that if time restrictions are a problem, you need to work on that. You need to set, for example, the math exam is a 60-minute test. You should set your timer for 55 minutes or possibly even 50 minutes if you're really struggling with the time parameters. And that'll help you to be able to complete the test on test day within the time limit. So after you've completed your subtest practices and after you've worked for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long you have up until the test, you need to take one more full-length practice test, preferably the Saturday before you take the real thing. Just like you did to start with, set aside 3.5 to 4 hours with real time restrictions, the same way that you would take it at Bevel or wherever else you're taking it in the real thing. After you take this last full-length practice tests and score yourself. If you're still weak in certain areas, there are things you can do to help prepare you more in this last week before the real test. You can watch videos. There are tons of videos online. If you can find what exactly you're struggling with, you need to pinpoint what exactly in the science section or the math section or the reading section that you struggle with. You can look up videos. You can ask your teacher. You can basically get some last minute review in to try to help you. You can maybe even raise your score a point, because 1 point may matter huge in your composite score. After you finish reviewing and cramming the week before for the things you still don't understand, take the last day or two off before the test. If the test is on Saturday, take Thursday and Friday off. Do something fun. Try not to think about it too much, because if you try to cram Thursday and Friday, it's really not going to do you any good, and it's just going to stress you out more than you already are.
Okay, so just some final tips for taking the ACT. I don't think we can stress enough the importance of taking practice tests over and over and over and over again until you are completely sick of it, because that is the only way to make you any better than you have been before, or to get you where you need to be. The test also is so different for everyone. Everyone has their different weaknesses, and everyone has the methods that work best for them, the test taking methods and otherwise. So this is really silly, but for me, I like to kind of dress nicely on the day of the test because it makes me feel more confident in my abilities. And but some people prefer to be relaxed in sweatpants or something. So when you're taking the practice test, you might want to kind of take it in different clothes and see what is more comfortable for you and how you feel the most confident too, because like I said earlier, it's half a psychological battle also. Another thing, when you're taking the test, I know if you take it at school, they sit you in alphabetical order, I think, so this may not really be an option, but when you take it at Bevel or wherever else you might take it, you definitely want to be intentional about who you sit beside in the test, because you don't want to sit beside someone who you know will distract you. It might even help you to sit beside people who you don't know already. Make a new friend before the test, or just don't, like I said, be distracted by whoever you sit by. Also, practice with the pencils that you feel the most comfortable writing with, and bring the same type of pencils to take the test in. It's just like a comfort thing again. Also know if you sit the most comfortable, you feel the most comfortable sitting in the middle of the exam room, or in the front, or in the back, just whatever, like I said, is the most comfortable for you. And so basically, I mean, this is your test. Tailor it to yourself however is best. If you have taken it before and you take it again and you still don't get the score you want, look into the options of taking a class, because there are only so many tips that people who are not professionals can give you, and so that's definitely an option that you would want to check into if you are continually not getting the score that you want, or if you need to raise a few points for scholarship purposes and otherwise, because this test is, I mean, as sad as it is incredibly important, and can determine so many aspects of your life after high school. How much money you'll have to pay for college wherever you go, whether or not you'll be admitted to the school you want to go to, and on and on and on, and placement for classes and things like that. And so it's so important to score your best and do your best, and really practice. And if you start in plenty of time, it won't be stressful, and you won't be cramming at the end, and you will be able to take those 2 days off before the test, because you won't feel obligated to study and make up for the time you haven't spent before then preparing for the test. So just figure out what works best for you. We hope these tips were all helpful, and let us know if you have any other questions.